President Donald Trump says he's pausing his plan to guide stranded ships to safety through the Strait of Hormuz. That temporary halt to the so-called Project Freedom comes just 2 days after it first began. Trump posting on social media there's been, quote, great progress on a deal with Tehran, but also saying the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports remains in place. Here's more from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
As far as a negotiation is concerned, I think the president's been clear that part of the negotiation process has to be not just the enrichment, but what happens to this material that's buried deep somewhere that they still have access to if they ever wanted to dig it out.
We're going to talk more about this now with France 24's Kethevane Gorjestani, who joins me on set. Kethevane, this Project Freedom is now on hold. What does that really change on the ground?
Well, look, not much really happened for the little time that Project Freedom was underway. It barely changed the situation really concretely in the Strait. Even the United States announcing that 2 commercial ships had made it through the Strait. That's not a lot for a couple of days of this Project Freedom compared to the sort of 100 of ships that go through the Strait in normal times per day. Just hours before Donald Trump announced the hold, Pete Hegseth was saying that hundreds of ships were lining up at the entrance of the Strait to be able to make that journey. That never materialized, or if that was true, then those ships are still stranded as we're speaking. He also insisted that the United States had full control over the Strait of Hormuz. That has not materialized either. The only change that we saw during this Project Freedom over the sort of 36 hours or so was a sharp escalation in attacks, the sharpest escalation we saw during the ceasefire. Other than that, Iran is still basically de facto blocking the Strait of Hormuz. The United States is still implementing a naval blockade south of the Strait. So we're pretty much back to a square one, if you think about it. The only thing that has changed is that the United States is now announcing that they're going to put forward a UN resolution with Gulf countries to defend freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. A resolution, according to the draft, that would require Iran to cease attacks, cease mining, and cease tolling in the Strait of Hormuz. Very unclear whether that resolution will even get to a vote this week, and whether countries that have veto power, like Russia, like China, who support Iran, would even let it go through and not put their veto there.
Now, Donald Trump actually justified this pause by saying it would give time for some kind of deal to be reached with Iran. Has there been any movement on that?
Look, Donald Trump said great progress has been made when it comes to those negotiations. And now there's a report from Axios, from Barak Ravid, who's very much into the Trump administration. And according to the sources that he's citing, this is the closest that the United States and Iran have been to a deal since the war began. What could be that deal? It would be a one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding to end the war and then set the framework for more detailed negotiations that would take place over a 30-day period. So we're far from a sort of comprehensive deal between the United States and Iran. Among the points that would be discussed during that 30-day period, details on how and how quickly to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, both from the U.S. naval blockade and from Iran's block on the Strait. Details about a moratorium on Iran's nuclear program, and the question of lifting of U.S. sanctions on Iran and the release of billions of dollars in Iranian frozen funds. As always, the devil is in the detail. It's easy to agree to sort of the headlines. It's much harder to agree to the details. And so you could see a memorandum of understanding that Iran would accept, and then within this 30-day, at any point, things could crumble and we could be back to square one. And we've seen optimism about these talks many times in the past couple of months, only to see those talks fall apart. The U.S. is saying that it's expecting Iran to sort of respond to these 14 points within the next 48 hours. But so far, nothing has actually been agreed to. And the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, who is currently traveling in China, said today, we will only accept a fair and comprehensive agreement. So we'll have to see whether or not the Iranians confirm what the American sources are saying.
All right. Thanks for that, Kethevane. France 24's Kethevane Gorjestani.